I'm sorry, I don't know. Should somebody is.
Ramesh, I just started the recording. No problem. Please go.
No, but that recording prompt is not moving away.
Oh, oops.
I don't know. Okay. Anyway, I remember the presentation, so it doesn't matter. So the fundamental issue being that sales efforts do not bring in proportional returns. That's one of the big problems. And with more volatility in business, more uncertainty, with a lot more of disruptions, this is only increasing. The second trend that we see, oh God, I'm not able to move okay. The second thing that we see, and this is something that's very, very common, is people, salespeople, particularly having an emotional roller coaster journey, where over the sales stage they oscillate between hope and despair, and at the end, uh, there's a lot of despair, but or there is some amount of elation that happens, and this is because they feel that quite a lot of what they do is not in their control. They may give their best efforts, but the results are not the same. And this again is something that I'm seeing more and more amplified as the world has become a far more complex place. The third thing, probably, which is very relevant to crossovers, clients, and audience, uh, is that we are competing in a market that is full of giants, and and many of you fight not just against the giants, but also fight against irrelevance, fight against clients not taking you seriously because you don't bring the size, because you don't bring in that element of reliability and track record that the giants have, and that again becomes a very, very difficult thing to fight against. So these are the three big trends that I've been seeing, particularly, and thing which is worsening as time has gone by. And in the last 3, 4 years, I'm seeing this being much sharper than earlier. And so, what can you do about it? So, there are three parts of your sales engine that you can fine tune to look at this. One is to adapt your messages to the buyer behavior and pattern, and we'll work on this a lot more. The second is to focus on having routines. And as they say, amateurs have processes, champions have routines. So focusing on routines which give outcomes, and the outcomes again, which are linked more to messages rather than to just measuring some numbers, which are basically lagging indicators. And the third thing is to work on your gravitas presence as well as your situational fluency. So these three things, if you're able to work on, you should be able to handle some of the challenges that are being thrown in your way. So adapting your messages to buyer behavior pattern, what do I mean by that? Typically, when we do sales, one of the fundamental issues that I have seen is that, Rajshri, please, can you go on mute? I'd be very grateful.
I'm already on mute. It is coming from somewhere else.
But it's your thing that's coming up.
There is Rajshri Gandhi. There are two Rajshri I can see.
Yeah, this is Rajshri Gandhi. Yeah. So thank you. So anyway, so your messages to the market are sometimes at cross purpose. Uh, Sales says something, marketing says something else. Uh, Even within sales, people say something different, and then production or delivery, service delivery says something else. So market messages can be at cross purposes, whereas it really has to be aligned to buying behavior. And when I mean buying behavior, what do I mean by buying behavior? There are really a range of buying behaviors that customers exhibit. Some of them exhibit a smooth buying behavior, which means that there are not too many bumps along the way. Whereas some customers exhibit very chaotic buying behavior, where they even go to the extent of evaluating vendors, uh, completely making them spend time. They also spend a lot of time and money in evaluating it, and finally say, no, we don't want to do anything. We want to continue the way we are doing it. So it's uh, as salespeople, you will understand the chaos when I mean chaotic in the buyer organization. So a number of people do this. Too many stakeholders having too much of differences of opinion. Someone wants to buy, someone wants the service to be shaped in one way. Another person wants the service to be shaped in another way. So that all of this leads to chaos. Now, the what data this is from very recent research. B2B decision labs. You can Google them and look them up. They say that only about 11% of sales buying is smooth. About 56% is chaotic, and what 33% is somewhere in the middle. So in the range, you can say that more than half the selling that you do are to organizations with unpredictable, chaotic buying behavior. And further research that they say is that this is actually, this buying behavior is influenced most by problem profile. And when they say what is a problem profile has three aspects to it. One is the context. Is the buyer and all the stakeholders who are making the decision, as you know, in a B2B sales, a minimum of 7 people are involved. And when the deals become larger, you can even have up to 20-25 people being involved in the decision making for a particular deal. And so, are all of them aware of the context under which this problem has been created? For instance, the pandemic was a context under which people had to suddenly move to a hybrid or a work from home environment. So they had to buy these tools, software, etc. It was a very clear context. So nobody really questioned it. And that's why a lot of people moved very quickly into it. The second is whether the problem is clear. For a number of organizations, again, if I take the pandemic thing, it's a very obvious, the problem was very clear. But there are others where the problem is not clear at all. For instance, Kodak continued to invest heavily in films instead of developing its digital photography. As you all know, that Kodak was the ones who invented digital cameras, but they are nowhere there. That's because they didn't see the problem coming their way, and they didn't see, the mobile phones having digital cameras to replace their business in such a short and rapid time. So, problem clarity. And the third thing about problem profile, which influences buying behavior, is consensus. As I said, as I earlier alluded to it, uh, sourcing things, the problem is something. Manufacturing things, the problem is something. IT thinks the problem is something. Finance thinks the problem is something. And all of them have to get together to finalize a deal. Obviously, the buying behavior is going to be chaotic. if there is no consensus about what the problem is. I'll pause here to see if there are any questions.
If you have any questions, you can post on the chats now, right now.
I don't know, leave me.
Ramesh, we have a question from Puneet. He's asking, what about the cost?
What about the
Cost.
cost? Obviously is part of the consensus portion of the problem. If there should be a reasonable consensus as to what it will cost to solve this problem. If it's like, there is a transport, there is a car needed for ferrying guests, and obviously sales guys will want a Rolls Royce. Finance will want a Maruti 800. Sourcing will want the car dealer to foot the entire service bill as well as the fuel bill. But there has to be a compromise somewhere. So once that consensus comes up about what the problem is and what the solution is, cost becomes again a part of the problem profile in terms of the consensus, because a business case has to be made internally before an opportunity is there. Before a problem, we'll have to check whether the problem is worthwhile to be solved. If it's too expensive, then they won't solve the problem. They'll just tolerate it. Does that answer the question, Puneet?
He says yes.
Fantastic. So your job fundamentally then becomes, how do you create a buying vision? Sales Benchmark Index says that nearly 3/4 of the deals go to the person, go to the vendor, the seller, who actually creates the buying vision. And the buying vision being nothing but why buy, and why should they actually solve this problem. And to do that, your job becomes how you can clarify the problem's context. And how can you bring out the problem's saliency? How is this problem unique? How is this problem not like the ones that you've solved earlier and requires separate attention? And why should you solve this problem? And also in building consensus about the problem. And I've been a little sneaky here. The first, clarifying problem context, is typically what solution selling methods focus on. Bringing out problem saliency is what corporate visions, these are different selling methods and different sales consultants. So clarifying problem context is something solution selling focuses on. Bringing out the problem saliency is something corporate visions focuses on. And building consensus about the problem is something that Revenue Storm focuses on. However, you need to do all these three in different ways to ensure that the buying vision is influenced, and therefore the problem profile itself being influenced. Why should you influence the problem profile? Because the smoother the problem profile is, the better is your selling ability, the faster is your sales cycle. And what you do actually is you influence the problem profile via your sales messages, via your messages. And the messages are basically of three types: why buy, why now, and why me. Why buy is what, whether the customer should really buy. Is there a problem to be bought into, to be solved? Why now? Is the problem urgent enough that it has to be addressed immediately? And why me is finally they have to choose you. Because if you create the problem, you do all the hard work of finding out the problem, figuring out the urgency of the problem. If you're not willing to solve it, or you're not the best person to solve it, somebody else takes the business. So the problem profile and the sales messages have to be worked iteratively throughout the sales cycle to ensure that your messages hit home and you escape that huge obstacle that you have in terms of irrelevance, in terms of being too small for your competition, in terms of being taken seriously, in terms of attention. All of that you try to obviate, you try to lessen the impact of all those challenges by doing this in an iterative way throughout the sales cycle. And therefore, but there's something that you need to do, which is that these messages cannot be the same for every buyer. Different buyers are having either smooth or chaotic messages, chaotic buying cycles. Regardless of how much you try to do for improving the problem profile, they end up continuously having these kind of challenges internally. And you need to cater to messages that cater to both the smooth as well as the chaotic side of buying behavior. Uh, B2B Decision Lab says that this is probably the biggest factor in terms of buying decisions. This is over and above which vertical they belong to, which what is the size of that organization, what has been their past history while buying. All of these are not as important as delivering messages which actually are different for people who have a relatively smoother buying cycle and people who have a relatively more chaotic buying cycle. So when you're going and don't just calibrate your messages saying, okay, hey, he's a bank, and therefore this is a bank that I'm meeting, and therefore this is the challenge they have. Yes, you do the problem profiling, but the amount of clarity that you have to bring in, the amount of saliency of the problem that you have to bring in, and the amount of consensus you have to drive will be far more when you are meeting somebody who has a chaotic buying behavior vis-a-vis when you're meeting somebody who has a smooth buying behavior. So this is an area which is just coming up in research. And this is an area which has been ignored for quite some time because there just wasn't research available there. So this is brand new research which is giving you an insight that you need to shape your messages according to what the customer's buying behavior is. The second part of this, once you've adapted your messages, is to see what kind of routines that you can have to keep improving your sales efforts and fine-tuning your sales engine. Typically, what happens is that a lot of organizations don't have a very clear view of their sales process. Despite having an elaborate CRM, despite mandating that CRMs have to be filled in, etc. Generally, adherence is in the exception and not a rule. And also, most of the time, when what sales process measures are numbers. What is how many opportunities, what is the total value of leads that you've generated, and what are the segments under which these leads have been generated. So a lot of it tends to be numbers rather than anything else. Whereas what I propose and what this does when you're fine tuning your sales engine is actually to build routines that measure effectiveness of your messages. Because let's understand this. The only thing that influences selling is the messages that come out of your mouths as salespeople. The other thing that influences sales is obviously your delivery. How well you're satisfying your customers, how well your customers are giving references and testimonials. These are the two big things. So keeping the delivery part aside, because that is something that only delivery can handle, not you. As salespeople, the only thing that you can focus on is in the message. And therefore, throughout the message, throughout the sales cycle, right from lead generation to negotiation and closure, if you can refine your messages based on not the vertical that the customer has, yes, it is important, not the size of the customer, but based on the problem profile and their buying behavior. If you're able to do that, research says that this is a far better way to actually focus on your messaging effectiveness. So let's look at this. You have your past behavior of the client to influence the initial message that goes into lead generation. For instance, if you are, say, focusing on solving a problem for a bank, more than worrying about the fact that it belongs to the banking domain, if you can focus on what is the problem that you're trying to solve and whether within the organization, within the purchasing organization, within the bank, they have enough understanding of the problem context, enough understanding of the importance of that problem, and you're able to drive consensus about the problem, you should be able to develop the messages accordingly. Any questions? Because this is a new concept that we're talking about, and some of you who are following uh, Sales Benchmark and B2B Decision Labs might know this, but this is absolute latest research. So if there are any questions, I'd love to clarify them before I move forward from here.
Ramesh, we have a question from Indrajit.
Okay.
How do we understand their buying behavior? Typically, this information may not be available in the public domain.
Oh, it's definitely not there in the public domain, but the minute you go in and meet 3 or 4 of the different stakeholders, you would be able to find out that there are differences or there is consensus about the problem that is trying to be solved. So yes, this is not something you can do sitting on LinkedIn and on Owler or some other websites to find out whether they have these problems. You have to talk to the prospects and you have to talk to different people within that organization to get this. And those are the routines that you have to measure. So if you're not able to talk to many stakeholders within the organization to understand your buying behavior, understand their buying behavior, you're going back to the beginning, and you will face the same problems that you've been facing till now. So the importance is to understand problem context clarity as well as salience. You have to talk to different stakeholders within the organization. I know that it's not an easy answer. This is not something that is easily done, but that is the challenge of sales. And what I'm trying to say is that this will give you far better results than just going blindly by having a problem, having saying that I have domain expertise in banking and private wealth management, or I have domain experience in visual merchandising or in manufacturing, discrete manufacturing, rather than saying that focusing on what exactly is the problem and how the customer buys and what the consensus is being driven, or the lack of it within the organization, will be able to give you clues about how you will be able to message.
Ramesh, we have a second question from Indrajit.
Okay.
Are there any frameworks to assess buying behavior in the early stages of discussion with the client?
Uh, there are uh, there are frameworks, but this is not the. We can have an offline conversation where I can help you understand these frameworks. Uh, but the idea is that you get the principle behind it. The principle behind it is that who you need to understand who the stakeholders are, what their issues are with respect to the problem, and how you're able to drive some level of consensus among stakeholders that the problem that they are speaking about is the same thing. Okay. Any other questions, Pooja? I see some chats. That's why I'm asking.
None yet.
Okay. The third thing that I want to talk about, and this is the last one, is to work on gravitas and presence, and also situational fluency when you meet with customers. So, what do we mean by that? What is your ability to develop insightful messages? I'll give an example. This was given by a good friend of mine called Srinivas Upuluri, who was the head of marketing for Infi. So when he was a young man, he accompanied a senior partner to a meeting in Delhi. And this was for a bank, a public sector bank. And as soon as the partner entered and introductions were made, the opening statement that the partner said was that 12 of your branches in Delhi cannibalize revenues from each other. Now remember, this partner, they were going there to set up a management control system. And when he goes in with that kind of an insight, there were some 6, 7 senior people in the meeting. All of them kind of got off their chairs saying, how can you say that? And then this man proved it with numbers. Why he says that, branches, they have too many branches which are actually competing for the same market and therefore cannibalizing revenues from each other. And he said, thanks to that insightful message that he delivered, after that, there was no question about who was getting the deal. That is the level of gravitas that you can develop. That, when you develop such insightful messages, that's the kind of gravitas that you can bring to the table. And gravitas is all about people taking you seriously, people respecting you for being a thought leader, instead of just spouting standard messages that you are God's gift to IT and that you do the best service. If you can develop insightful messages about the customer, that is when you have gravitas. The second thing is, how do you deliver these messages in a very memorable way? Now, if you see my slides, I don't think anyone will complain that these slides are cluttered or that these graphics are so heavy and the messages are extremely, obscure. The idea is to deliver messages that stick to a customer's, that stick with the customer, so that they can get back to you when they think that they have a problem to be solved somewhere in this area. So do it with, surprising simplicity, some amount of insightful messages which are relevant to them, and by using what we call as the success framework. It's another framework. This is by two brothers called Chip and Dan Heath, who've written a wonderful book called Made to Stick, and they come up with uh, a category of messages. Your messages has to be simple. It could be unexpected. It should be concrete. It has to have contrast, uh, and it can be emotional, have an emotional component to it, or a story to it. So, of these six, if you have more than three elements, then your message is a memorable message. So, simple, unexpected, contrast, concrete, emotion, story. Out of that six, you need to have at least three elements to deliver a powerful message that is somehow retained by the customer. And you have to prepare a lot for maintaining your poise under pressure, which is what we call a situational fluency. Uh, a lot of people uh, rehearse for the ideal, but they don't rehearse for the questions that the customer can ask. So prepare for different questions that come. But this is again, the clue here is your questions will come primarily about the problem's context, the problem's saliency, and questions will come around driving consensus, because different people will see the same problem in different ways. So think of questions that will come on that. Think of different stakeholders asking you different questions under that, those different, because how a finance person looks at, receipts, receivables is quite different from how a salesperson looks at receivables. So think of such things to come up with, prepare yourselves for different sorts of stakeholders having different pressures on you. And while working on it, a lot of your messages are going to be in front of customers, either through the Zoom link or now, hopefully, very soon, or in face to face. I think you need to have a role model. I mean, these are three role models that I have given. They need not necessarily be your role models, but you have to pick and imitate a role model. It could be your boss. It could be somebody on the street who does a storyteller that you've seen who does wonderful storytelling. It could be a teacher that you loved. Pick a role model and imitate them. I had this wonderful opportunity of spending a lot of time at the Louvre. It's the museum in Paris. What really struck me there was that a number of artists, students from the art schools, will come with their sketchbooks and their crayons and their watercolors, and they will actually come sit on the floor and copy the masters. So, there's a Monet painting, and you could see some 5 students sitting on the floor before the Monet painting and copying it. Imitate the masters. That's a brilliant way in which you can become better. You can develop gravitas and fluency. And my daughter is training to be a pianist, and she had her graduation concert some time back. In the graduation concert, she played 2 pieces, totaling about 10 minutes. I think she practiced probably for about 150, 200 hours to just play that. And I was thinking, I get 2 hours of stage time probably in a week. How much do I practice? So rehearse, and ideally rehearse with a coach so that you develop your gravitas. And remember, you have to provide the insightful messages to develop your gravitas. And while doing that, remember the problem profile, the problem context, the problem salience, and the problem's consensus, driving consensus. So if you can think of all this in a unified way and rehearse your messages, and ideally with a coach who could be your boss, who could be your friend, who could be an external hire, a consultant, regardless, rehearse with somebody so that when you go in front of the customer, you're able to display the gravitas and the seriousness that helps you stand up against the giants. And you come across as a serious player who can compete in the market. That's it for the presentation. And who am I? I think Pooja has beautifully explained, introduced me. I'm available on LinkedIn. Please send a connection request and I will definitely accept it. And if you want to contact, please do contact Karthik at this email ID for any clarifications. I can now throw this open for questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ramesh. Now this webinar is open for questions. So please, you can ask your questions on the chat.
Oops, I went off video for some time. Okay.
No problem. Thank you, Ajit.
So Ajit has a question?
No, he says thank you, Ramesh, for your insights. So maybe while we wait for others to come up with their questions, Ramesh, I would like to thank you for this brilliant and informative session, and I would also like to thank everyone else for joining us today. I've just shared a link to a WhatsApp group on the chat. If you would like to receive more information on this topic, you can please join that link.
Yeah, no jokes and nothing there. Only admin, only an admin can send messages. Is that the way you do it?
I think Karthik will be able to, or Pooja will get better. Meanwhile, Ramesh, we have a question for you from Indrajit.
Okay.
How do you address impromptu questions not anticipated without losing our gravitas?
Okay. Tough. There are places where everyone gets stumped, not because they're not prepared, but because there is always a googly sometime. Yeah, try to answer it to the best of your ability, but there is a brilliant answer always available. I don't know. I will get back to you. I will find out and get back to you. One of the things that a lot of salespeople do is, they don't want to show something even remotely they would be considered as ignorant. So they try to fudge their answers, fumble through it, and all of that. You don't have to. You can say, sorry, I don't know. I didn't prepare for that question. I will answer that. So that's one straight way of answering this. But yes, if it's a very, very relevant question, you can probably ask them to explain why they're asking that question. What goes on behind, what is it that has prompted them to ask that question? And maybe that can give you some clues as to how to answer the question. But yeah, be straight up. say, sorry, that is not a question I'm prepared to answer now. I'll be able to answer in after I think about it. There's nothing wrong with it.
Ramesh, we have another question from Trupti Shukla. Speaking of behavioral economics, there is so irrational decisions that consumers make. We can connect the dots looking over past. How about this? How about sensing the present and predicting the future to act?
How about? Sorry, I didn't.
How about sensing the present and predicting the future to act?
Well, see, I don't think anyone can predict the future with any reasonable accuracy. Uh, I'm not sure that I completely understood the question, but what you're trying to ask is that given this ocean of unpredictable behavior, which behavioral economics has kind of highlighted. There's so much of uncertainty around even incentives, whether they work or not. There's such a huge debate going on now, and what sort of incentives work and don't work, and all of that. So, in that kind of a scenario, how can you be sure that some of these methods work? Is that your question, Pooja, right? I'm sorry, who asked the question, Pooja?
Trupti.
Trupti. Is that your question, Trupti? Have I rephrased it or have I completely mangled it?
Okay, we don't yet have a response from. Maybe she's typing that.
Okay.
So yes, sort of in that context.
Yeah. So, see, while there is some amount of irrationality in behavior, there are some settled observations, empirical observations that are there. One is the prospect theory, which says that people fear loss more than appreciate gains. And the ratio is, I think, anywhere between 2 and 3:1. That is, you feel twice the pain in losing 1 rupee as the pleasure you feel in gaining 1 rupee. So loss avoidance is a much better way to message rather than gain. So that's one side of the story. And therefore, when you're framing your problems, if you frame it along the lines of loss aversion rather than gain because of solving a problem, that helps you in shaping the problem profile and therefore the buyer behavior in turn, and therefore your ability to create the buying vision. So that's one. The second, I think everybody faces this irrationality. It's not just you. So as sellers, when you go to clients, you're a human being, and today you like Amul chocolate, tomorrow you like Cadbury's. No, and I don't think anyone can question that. And therefore, but everybody is in the same boat. So what you're trying to do is apply a lot more method in places where it appears to be working better. At least the science shows, research shows that focusing on problems and focusing on buyer behavior and messaging according to that to influence buyer behavior through clarifying the problem is a much better way of gaining an edge over your competition. So so you just do that. There is nothing absolutely certain about these things. There will always be edges that go to the floor. I mean, one day you're batting so well, but you get out for a very low score, and the next day you're batting so horribly and you score a century. So sales sometimes is that way. So you have to know how to roll with the punches.
Sure. Ramesh, we have another question from Pradeep, and he says, can you please elaborate on prepare for poise under pressure?
Okay. As I said, most of the pressure in sales comes from chaotic buying process of the customer side. I'm not going to talk about the lack of fulfillment that sometimes happens and sales not getting enough internal support to sell effectively to organizations. That is its separate issue that we are not dealing with right now. So given that as a constant, when you're looking at it, most of your selling pressure, the differences come in because the customer's process is chaotic. You're not able to predict what they will be doing, when they will be making a decision. And if somebody makes a decision, will it be opposed by the other guy? And therefore, do they have a political equation thing there, and whether it becomes a power struggle? So all of this is something that can exert a lot of pressure on sales, because your manager will say, okay, when is it closing? Will it close this quarter? Particularly in the last month of quarter, if you've been in sales, you'll know that your sales boss is going to ask you, is it closing this quarter? And you won't have an answer for it. That's one side of pressure, internal pressure that you have to handle. So the external pressure is the customer themselves exerting pressure on you, asking you different sorts of questions. Because there is no consensus, somebody coming and saying, no, this is, I don't agree with your findings. I don't agree with what you're saying. You're saying that this ROI will be, 20%, whereas this shows my ROI is going to be only 3%. And therefore the business case doesn't work. So those kind of pressures can also be on you, which is why if you work on the context in which the problem is generated, the salience of the problem, and then you try to drive consensus about the problem, you will be able to handle this pressure a lot more. And you will have the poise to act under such pressure. Does that answer your question?
Ramesh, I'm going to unmute everyone so that they can probably start asking the questions themselves. I had muted everyone so that, when somebody new joins, you don't get disturbed. So here I'm unmuting everyone. So please feel free to ask your questions. You can unmute yourselves now and you can ask your questions, please.
In the chat,
one question, but when you answered to one of the persons here in terms of if you don't have an answer, we can say that we don't have an answer and we'll come back to you. Do you think when we go for a corporate meeting, etc., will the account really appreciate this kind of an I know it's honest, but will they appreciate this kind of reply?
Well, if this reply is because you're unprepared with even some of the basic things that are that you're supposed to know the answer for. For instance, the customer comes and asks you, okay, does your solution cover these areas? Then you can't say, no, I don't know. Fine. But if there is an obscure question that's coming your way, he says, the latest says that the HIPAA standards have changed 3 days ago, and your pharma solution needs to incorporate some standard there. And does your solution incorporate that? You can say, no, I don't know. Right?
Understood. Yeah, thanks.
So it depends on the question. I mean, see, if you can't keep saying no to, if you don't know the answer to certain obvious questions, then it's a lack of preparation. And yes, your boss has every right to frown on that.
Got it. Thank you.
Ramesh, one of the questions from the chat, I'm just reading out. Ajit has asked you, what has prompted you to write your book?
See, I think what really prompted me to write the book was that I felt that we were leaving too much of money on the table. Our ability to negotiate, our ability to sell into different customers, our ability to position ourselves appropriately, I think was not up to what I felt we could do, and there was a lot of money being left on the table because of that. And that's why I wrote the book to say that, look, there are different power equations at play here. And based on the power equation that you have with your customer, you have to play the game in a different way to make sure that you make the best out of it while delivering the best value to the customer, of course. So that was the reason to buy the thing. Because I think that if we had done a better job of selling, our services with a little more of margin, I would have been richer. So you could say that in some ways it was a personal thing, because if my company had sold a little more at a higher margin, my stock options would have been so much more valuable. I wouldn't have had to write books to survive. I hope that answers the question.
Ajit says it's an interesting perspective. Ajit, you can actually unmute yourself and say that. All right. So Ramesh, we have Russell Patrick. He has a question for you. How can we build the trust and credibility with a client who is approaching the first time through virtual?
Oh, wow. Wow. See, I don't think there's much you can do in the first few meetings, except having as much of research done about the customer as possible. I'll give you an example, and this was when Royal Bank of Scotland visited Infosys, and we were doing all our song and dance and taking them around the campus, etc. And then finally we took them to the customer building number 1, where Nandan has this lovely conference room. So we settle the customers, and then Nandan walks in. And the first question Nandan asks the RBS guy, the Royal Bank of Scotland guy, is, how is it that you manage with a 46% cost to income ratio? You must see the way the customer's face brightened. Steve was his name. You must see the way, his face just brightened up, because Nandan had asked precisely the question, which was probably the specialty about RBS. They were having an absolutely extremely low cost to income ratio, which means that they were making a lot more money than their fixed costs. So it's a brilliant question he asked, and obviously he asked that question because he researched them. This is not something that we had given. We usually give a lot of research to about who is coming. We give briefing notes, which obviously they all read. But I had prepared the briefing note. I did not have this point in the briefing note that I gave to Nandan. Nandan had done his own research, or had somebody do a little more of research, and he came up and asked that question. So can you ask such questions? Can you research enough about them? And can you know them that way so that they trust? The first thing they will trust is your competence. Trust has two big components. One is your competence. That is, you will say, you are capable of saying, doing what you say you will do. And the second is generosity. So how do you demonstrate that generosity is by actually spending that effort to getting to know that person, and then doing a little bit of research on that person, or not being creepy about it. Sorry, not stalking them on Facebook and stuff like that, but doing some professional research on them, and then exhibiting that through intelligent questions or insights, and then coming out with and that's, but there is, you can only have you can, in your first meeting, you can destroy trust. You can't build up trust to that extent that they will trust you, but you can completely destroy trust in your first few meetings. So avoid that and try to be authentic, try to be yourself. Don't try to be somebody else you're not. It's exhausting and in most cases extremely transparent to the other side. And again, developing those insights, look at the problem profile, focus on that.
Okay. So can we move on to the next question, Ramesh?
Yeah, please.
Okay. We have a question by Setu Madhavan. Can we assume that the problem of one customer will be faced by other customers in the same vertical or domain and plan our responses accordingly?
I'll give this example of Xerox. Xerox has this salesman, and they used to be some of the best salesmen. But after an initial peaking of their individual productivity, how many sales they close, how many orders they close, actually after some time they observed that it was plateauing and then actually dipping. So when they went into the reasons as to why this individual sales guy's productivity is decreasing, say beyond about 3-4 years, they realized something very, very startling. What they found was that after the initial learning, till about the third year, with every customer they met, they did not make any assumptions about the customer. They used to ask the questions, discover the problem, elaborate the problem, take the time to shape the solution and deliver it. But after having gone through that exercise, say, 100 times or 150 times, with the newer customers that came after 3 years, they started taking shortcuts. They stopped asking those detailed questions to the customer. They stopped spending the time to jointly develop the solution with the customer, shape the problem with the customer. And therefore, customers stopped buying. So while you can explain saying that, look, we just had a customer in your vertical and they face this problem. You can, and are you facing this problem? How are you facing it? How different is it in your case? The difference and the nuances, taking the time to understand that and then shaping your solution. Forget the fact that your solution may be absolutely the same. But taking that effort, time to shape that solution, drive that consensus around the problem profile individually for each customers will help you succeed with every of the sales, rather than making assumptions about the customer just because they fall under the same vertical. Remember, they may have different buying behaviors, and you need to shape your message according to the buying behaviors. The vertical doesn't matter as much. Sedhu, I hope that answers your question. Okay. Any more questions?
Yes, from Indrajit, could you please reiterate the 6 levers of messaging?
Oh yeah, the 6 levers of messaging. It's very this thing. It's success without the last S. SUCCES. So it's simple, unexpected, concrete, contrast, emotion, story. At least have 3 of these elements. In any message. Okay. There are lots of chats there, 37 chats I can see.
Yeah,
And
I'm just
I'm not
trying to go through them and give you and ask those questions. So we have another question from Russell. What is the biggest challenge faced as a salesperson, and how to overcome that when it comes to clients?
biggest challenge faced as a salesperson. Different salespeople will have different challenges. But I think one of the biggest that I have faced and I have had people talk about is how do you keep a positive attitude amidst so much of rejection? See, let's put it this way. Typically, if you're in a very successful sales organization in B2B, where you're following up on fairly large deals, if you have a 30% success rate, it's very good. It's good. And which means that you're going to lose 7 out of 10 deals. And you're going to lose it after putting in a lot of effort into those deals. And a lot of emotional effort goes into it. This is emotional labor as well. So, and then you lose. It hurts you. And sometimes it even hurts you physically. So that I think would probably be the biggest challenge.
All right. And another question from Indrajit. Could I please help understand the problem saliency component in some detail?
Okay, in some detail. Okay, so see, at any point in time, a prospect, a customer is juggling with at least 7, 8 different problems that they have to solve. Otherwise, they're not important. Otherwise, they're not decision makers, and you don't have any business talking to them, right? So you're going to talk to people who have multiple problems, and you're going there to say that the problem for which you have a solution has to be important. How do you bring about that saliency? How do you say that this problem that you probably don't consider as that seriously or that important, down the line could actually become a very serious issue? Or even if it is the number one problem that the person is facing, how do you go about saying, okay, this is your number one problem as a chief marketing officer, this is your number one problem. How can you make it the CEO's number one problem so that you get the funding, you get the adequate attention to solve that problem? So problem saliency is that amplifies the impact of that problem within that organization and drives consensus that it is a serious enough problem to be addressed fairly quickly. Hope that answers. Indrajit, thank you so much. You've been asking a lot of lovely questions.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Yeah. Oh my God.
I think it's in a very
Ramesh.
noisy.
Yeah, so Ramesh, Rajshri wants to know, why do customers show interest and later back out from giving us business?
Oh yeah, there's a very simple thing. Nearly 60% of sales initiatives, selling opportunities that you put in your pipeline end up in no decision. This is sales benchmark index data from some time back, but it hasn't changed much. That is nearly 2/3 of your sales efforts go into the customer saying, I'm not going to make any decision. Now, one of the fundamental reasons why it happens is because you have not established the buying vision. And what is the buying vision? Why they should buy. Why should they buy from you? Forget why they should buy from you, why they should buy now. Why should they buy? A lot of times, many of us focus on why me, why you should choose me instead of somebody else. But we don't even focus on why the customer should buy something. Do they really need it? And that goes back to the problem profile. Do they have a problem where the context is fairly clear, where the problem saliency is there, and where there is some consensus that there is a problem and that it needs to be solved? If you don't have that, then the customer sometimes they also have some free time on their hands and they need to know what is happening in the market, and therefore, and you're willing to invest your time and effort in it. So they just host you and you spend your time, and for a price of coffee or lunch, they get some wonderful free consulting from you.
So, Ramesh, actually, the question was for me. My name is Melvin.
Okay.
This question was asked by me. Actually, we're all joining on the same link.
Okay.
So this question, I just want to make it a little. I just want to elaborate the question. Just want to let you know that, say for example, we're talking with a prospect. The prospect goes ahead and engages with us. He shows interest, and he gives you the opportunity. He tells that this is what is the requirement that we have, and we engage with him in a talk. He shows the interest at the start, and later on, he then we go ahead, we send him all the things that wherein we could go ahead and fulfill the opportunity that he has given us. But then he later on he backs out. He doesn't want to go ahead and say he's not interested, or he's he doesn't want to go ahead and take this deal. He just is silent. He just goes blank.
Yeah, they
So
go. Yeah.
so that is where the emotional aspect comes into picture, wherein we are emotionally involved in the deal, and then later on, the client is not responding.
Absolutely. Yeah, it happens. It happens to the best of us. The see, as a consultant, and this is a luxury, and obviously that's not something that you guys can afford to have. But you can take some of the principles of that. As a consultant, I never send out a proposal without understanding the problem I'm solving, the scope that is there, and some sort of agreement around the financials. I don't send out a proposal at all. Of course, in your case, you can't do that that easily, but you can couch it in slightly different ways. One is there a business case? What is the problem they're trying to solve? And if they solve that problem, how is it going to reduce their costs or increase their revenues? So if it's going to increase the revenues by say about $500,000, but your project is worth 3 million. Obviously, it doesn't make any business case, right? So don't couch it as commercials, but try to see whether there's a business case. Try to see if there is genuinely a problem out there. Because sometimes what happens is you get a meeting because someone set it up. Your inside sales guy called them up and told them that you're God's gift to web development or something. And so the guy says, okay, come over. And then you go and meet, and then he says, okay, I have this vague problem or whatever. And he throws that problem to you. But the thing is that a genuine problem? And how is it impacting the work that they're doing? Explore the problem a lot more before you give a proposal. And you need not do that by, conducting a interrogation of the customer. A lot of it can be done in the background. But then you can confirm it once in a while saying, look, this is what we found, this is what it is. Is this your problem? Is this how you want it to be solved? Co-opt the customer. You will find this behavior going down a lot, or you will find the customer actually evading the initial engagement itself, which gives you a very, very good indication that they're not serious. But yeah, despite best efforts, this will continue to happen. It's part and parcel. Just don't make it the only, the biggest part of your sales life, that you have too many of these happening.
Thanks, Ramesh. Yeah, that answers my question.
Again, focus on the problem. Focus on problem clarity, problem salience, problem context. So that way you can minimize this behavior. But at the end of the day, we're all human beings, and context keeps changing, situations change, roles change, problems change, and therefore somebody who's asked you to do something may actually move on to completely something else. Those are things that you can't obviously help.
Ramesh, we have a question from Rohan. He wants to know how to find the right influencer.
Find the right influencer. Influencer for what? For what, Rohan? You can, I think.
Rohan, would you like to unmute and ask? Okay. Since we just have another 13 minutes to go, maybe we'll jump on to the next question. How can we deal with price-based barriers? Russell Patrick would like to know, how can we deal with price-based barriers?
Okay. I think the best way of dealing with it is by establishing a solid business case. If you have a business case which says that you're delivering an ROI, which is far in excess of their total business ROI, they will obviously take you seriously. And then price is not that much of a barrier. However, that doesn't give you permission to, be completely off the chart when compared to your competition. So you need to have some mechanisms of finding out, benchmarking yourself against competition, seeing what their cost structures are, how are you matching to that. Keep listening to your salespeople. While we tend to discount salespeople who say that we lost on price, but if you keep getting the message that we're losing on price, it probably means that you are overpriced for the market. And you might want to look at your cost structures or the way you're delivering, or the way you're engineering your solutions. At the same time, if you're winning too much, that also means that you've probably underpriced yourself to the market. You should not be winning every deal that you get. If you are, that means you're really underpricing yourself. So yeah, it has to be a healthy buy media, where losing some deals on price is fine. But yeah, you can't be losing 90% of your deals on price. Then there is a problem. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does, he says. So Ramesh, since we have just 10 more minutes in our hand, we have 2 more questions. Shubham has just asked a question: how to find influencer who influences the decision maker in a company?
Oh. Well, with LinkedIn, you can see who the decision maker is following and see if there are influences there. You need to have some friends within the organization. You need to have some connects inside. Salespeople know how to do that. It's one of the first things that bosses teach you. How to schmooze, how to get connections within organizations is something. If you don't know, then I suggest that you start apprenticing with somebody who does it well. Because this is something no book will teach you. This is something you have to do with somebody, a mentor who helps you do it within the organization. And most sales managers love teaching this to their people. So you shouldn't have a problem.
Great. Ramesh, we have Mohan Raidu. He has just requested you to explain gravitas once more.
Okay. See, you see leaders, some leaders, when they come and talk, people listen, people take them seriously. And you've also seen some people, when they come to talk or do something, they say, "Arey, this fellow is a joker." The people you take seriously, those people are the ones who have gravitas. I think that's the best way of explaining gravitas. It's the ability to make the other person take you seriously with the way you deliver your message, with the passion with which you deliver it, with the authority with which you deliver it, and with the body language, with your appearance, the whole package. Think Obama, think Nelson Mandela. It's a absolute gravitas. Even when they make jokes. See Obama's White House Correspondents' Dinner, where he makes jokes. Even there, he exudes gravitas. Even when he's in a comedy kind of a role. And that's the important thing. I hope that kind of gives you some clues about what gravitas is. Another synonym equivalent word is something called presence. And people talk about executive presence and presence. And there's this wonderful lady called Amy Cuddy, AMYCUDDY. So Amy Cuddy talks a lot about this presence and how you can overcome what is known as the imposter syndrome and come up with presence. So she's got some lovely TED Talks and stuff. So please do have a look at it and rehearse in a way that you come across serious and you come across as a, not serious, but not mournful, not somber. So there's a difference between the two. Does that answer your question?
He says yes. Thank you. And Ramesh, one last question from Indrajit. I think he has raised his hand, and yeah, Indrajit, would you like to ask the question? Unmute yourself and ask.
Yeah. Hi, Ramesh. Thanks so much. I really enjoyed
Oops.
the insights you shared. I had a follow-up question to the price-based decision. See, when we meet customers, most of the time the key decision lever would be pricing. Yeah. Now,
I mean, the key.
how do we move the customer from a pricing lever to a value-based lever?
I mean, as I keep saying, it's about demonstrating value. And when we say demonstrating value, it's ROI. It's return on investment or payback period. So if you're able to, or in some cases, they will call it the business case. If you're able to establish a clear business case, a credible business case, which you have jointly developed or which you have vetted with the customer, vetted with somebody inside the customer organization, which is what you can do in fairly large deals and important ones. Then there is price is just one part of it. So yes, they may still haggle a bit, they may still negotiate a little, but in fact, business will be sending sourcing a clear message that don't push them too hard. We need this deal and we need these guys to deliver as the partners to deliver this solution. So please don't push them too hard. I have seen customers doing that, sending very clear instruction to sourcing that they should not be pushed beyond a particular point. So yeah, I mean, if you're able to demonstrate business case, pricing then becomes a lesser of the problem.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Ramesh. We just probably we can just squeeze in one more last question, which is from Shubham. Which is the most effective way to contact decision maker? Is it cold call or email?
Neither. Okay. I do not subscribe to the feeling of cold calling. In fact, I was listening to a podcast by Angela Duckworth and Stephen Dubner. Stephen Dubner of Freakonomics fame and Angela Duckworth of who wrote the book Grit, and she is a MacArthur Fellow Grant recipient as well. Amazingly smart woman, and this guy is of course amazingly smart. So both of them, and they were talking about how there is this foundation which gives surgery for cleft lips. People, children with cleft lips. So to do that surgery, I think it's called some smile something. And as you know, these are non-government organizations which depend on donations, and so they keep sending mails saying, and that too physical mails, requesting for donations, giving them some little freebies like self-addressed envelopes and stuff like that. But Smiles Foundation did something drastically different. They sent a mailer which said, this is the only time you can choose 3 options. One is, I am only donating once. Or the second option was, keep contacting me once in 6 months or 12 months. Once a year only, send me a mail. And the third option was keep sending me all updates. So once, and you will never call me, once a year, and then 18 updates in a year. Now, because they gave this option saying we'll never get back to you if you donate, they actually received 40% more donations. A lot of people hesitate to donate because the minute you get onto these non-governmental organization roles, they keep bombarding you with requests for donation, because for them to get one generous person who donates to them is very tough. Now, the same situation is there in cold calling as well. The executive answers one call from a cold call for one organization. Oh man, the amount of people who pile onto him is just too many. And what people don't realize with these cold calling is, how many of you really respect this Standard Chartered and HDFC asking you for personal loans, whether you want a personal loan or a credit card? It actually diminishes their brands. So I would say avoid cold calling, avoid even cold emails. The best way of getting a person is by pull marketing. There's a lovely book by Seth Godin by the same name, Permission Marketing, it's called. Read that book. It gives you a wonderful way in which you can shape demand. And shaping demand is by thought leadership. McKinsey people don't do cold calling. Accenture doesn't do cold calling. Bain Consulting doesn't do cold calling. Why should you?
Ramesh, could you repeat the name of the book, please?
Permission Marketing by Seth Godin. SETH Godin, Godin.
Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Ramesh. I think with this, we come to an end of this webinar today. And thank you, Ramesh, once again. And I also hope our audience have had all their questions answered. If you still have any more questions, please join the WhatsApp link shared in the chat. And have a great rest of the evening. See you all in the next webinar next month. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. I think we had some decent attendance also. Very nice. Lovely questions, especially Indrajit. Thank you for your series of questions, which kept us all engaged. I really enjoyed it. I hope you all enjoyed this and took away at least one or two insights. Thank you.
Thank you, Ramesh.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thanks, Pooja, and the rest of the team.
Thank you, Ramesh. Thank you, Pooja.
Thank you. Okay.
I think Ramesh, we